Okay.
Hello, book lovers, and welcome to Book Talk Radio Club. My name is Claire Harris, and today I'm talking to author Deborah J. Deborah is the author of Sharp Scratch. After 40 years of surgery, my luck ran out. Deborah J was no stranger to the operating theatre. Indeed, she'd had so many surgeries she'd lost count, but this one must have been her panacea, finally setting her free from years of pain. But things went wrong, badly wrong. She became one of the tiny group of people who suffer life-changing, catastrophic surgical complications. In an emotional, heart-tugging book, Deborah recounts her years-long daily struggle with unseen, invisible forces which compelled her to adapt to life with a chronic illness. Enlivened by happy moments despite the daily stresses and strains on her relationships, this frank roller coaster of a story is ultimately the story of one woman's triumph over a type of hell you didn't even know existed. Hello, Deborah. First of all, welcome and thank you for coming to talk to me on Book Talk Radio Club.
Hi, Claire. Thank you for having me.
My pleasure. I would say you've been through hell many times. Can you give a brief overview of your surgery journey?
Well, I'm 63 now, and my health was okay until I was about 25, and then things started to go wrong for me. I started to get all sorts of horrible symptoms like abscesses, exhaustion, problems going to the loo, etc. My daughter was about 1. My husband was away in the Royal Navy, and I was working full time. So my GP initially dismissed my symptoms as stress and just being a bit run down. But as things progressed and after many tests, I was told I needed surgery to remove part of my large bowel, which came as a massive shock, to be honest.
I bet.
And after that, one problem seemed to lead to another. And then I had some kind of surgery each and every year thereafter for the next 30 years.
Jesus.
So, as you can imagine, Claire, it impacted on my life greatly.
Sure. I bet.
Yeah.
I bet.
Yeah.
So why did you decide to write the book Sharp Scratch?
Well, in 2015, after a lifetime of surgeries, I was told I needed a hysterectomy, which was supposed to be, as I've said in the book, my panacea to finally set me free from pain and problems and uncertainty. However, I had serious complications when my bowel perforated and left me with a visible hole in my stomach called an enterocutaneous fistula. Entero meaning intestine and cutaneous meaning skin. I'd never even heard of it.
Sure.
I was in hospital for months. I couldn't eat or drink. I was vein fed, and I became seriously depressed.
I'm surprised.
Yeah, I started writing a journal to record my journey. The rationale being I could look back and see what progress I was making.
Sure.
But the problem was, Claire, that there was little progress. And in fact, things got worse as time went on. I gave up on the journal as I found it too depressing, to be honest. Several years later, I decided to revisit the journal and continue with my story. I then found Penny Reeves of Saran Publishers, who wanted to help me get my story out there.
Oh, wow.
And so, yeah, that was amazing for me. And Sharp Scratch was born, as they say.
It must have been very painful to write your story, or did you actually find it cathartic?
I think it was a bit of both, really, if I'm honest, Claire. Reliving the events of 2015 and 2017 when I had those huge surgeries and nearly died was obviously very painful. My husband, in fact, couldn't read the manuscripts as it just triggered too many bad memories for him. And I found myself often writing through tear-filled eyes. But at last, I was able to actually acknowledge what had happened. And I suppose, in a way, that yes, it was very cleansing and very cathartic, as you say. Yeah.
I think that when you go through trauma, for however long, by keeping it in, it just seems to make it worse because we don't always want to revisit what we've experienced. But when you write it down, even when you write it down just for yourself and maybe, get rid of it, burn it or throw it away, it does help. It's by putting it in black and white, for some reason, it's like sharing. I know that it certainly helps.
It
So
does, yes.
you had so many surgeries. So you're saying that the last one was in what, 2017?
Yeah, the last major one was in 2017 when they tried to repair the fistula. So the fistula is essentially a hole in my gut,
Oh,
which is connected to my bowel. And,
yeah.
you know, without going into too much detail, it's a really difficult thing to manage. And most
Mm,
people get them repaired, basically. But in my case, had I realised the seriousness of the state of my insides and how
mm,
difficult it was going to be to repair the fistula, I would never have had that op.
I'm sure.
Um, I had really bad complications after, and it nearly killed me as I had sepsis and respiratory failure.
Wow.
And to make it all much worse, the repair failed, and I
Oh,
actually ended up with a worse fistula than they tried to fix.
oh goodness.
Um, yeah, my family and I were just devastated. I've never fully recovered from that op, and the consequences of having sepsis and everything else. It's now causing other health issues as well.
Yeah, I can
Um,
believe it.
yeah, I
So,
mean, at one point I had to wear 3 bags on my abdomen, 2 for the fistulas and 1 for my long-standing stoma. I mean, it was awful. It was an awful time.
yeah, I was just
Yeah.
going to ask you, how do you manage the important tasks that rule your day? I like the stomach care and dressings.
Well, the first thing I'd like to say to anyone who may be listening who has a stoma, as in a colostomy or an ileostomy, the management of those type of stomas is very difficult. Very different to that of a fistula. I
Mm,
don't want to frighten people
yeah,
because, before this happened, when I just had a stoma, I actually went on holiday once and forgot to take my stoma bags. That's how laid back I was about
yeah,
it all. But the
yeah.
fistula is a very different beast, and I think beast is a good word to describe it. I have to change the bags at least once a day, and I require help from my husband. I usually do the main change at 7 o'clock at night, and it takes a few hours because you've got to use paste and different things to make it stick.
Oh,
For anyone who's interested, there is more about my routine on my
sure.
Facebook page because without actually seeing it, it's hard to explain.
Yeah.
Friends have helped me out, and a lovely lady called Georgia passed some tips on to me, which basically stopped me being housebound and enabled me to go out again. And
That's good.
I'll be forever grateful to her because a fistula is quite rare, and there's
Right.
not a lot of experience out there. Um, Without George's advice, I don't think I'd have even made it to my daughter's wedding because at one point I was changing the fistula bag and it was leaking within 2 hours. It was just
Oh, God.
awful.
Oh, it sounds
But
horrible.
things, have improved a bit from there now. But it's still a big part of my day. It
Sure.
has to be factored in every day. There's no getting away from it.
Your whole story really started out with a breech birth of your daughter Annie, and your labor was hard and long, but you were reassured that as you have large feet, you'll probably have a large pelvis. What horrifies me more than anything is that the medical staff used that as a rationale and actually caused you harm. It's incredible. But isn't it amazing as women, we listen to that kind of nonsense that still goes on to this day?
Yeah, you're right. I mean, I had my daughter almost 40 years ago, but yeah, some things never change, do they? When I was told that, I was in mid-labour, and
Mm,
I'm thinking a cesarean would have been dangerous, or maybe they were trying to reassure me. I don't know. And I
yeah.
think in those days, you just accepted what you were told
Oh,
and
yeah, you did.
got on
Absolutely.
with it.
Yeah.
Yeah. Um, and I think sometimes, when bad things happen in life, we always look for reasons. And
Hmm.
yes, I did have a terrible labour, and yes, my problems did start afterwards. But obviously, I'd never change that for the world. My daughter
Of course not.
is an absolute gem. But I have to agree, Claire, that over the years, I have felt quite fobbed off and almost invisible, particularly in recent years. To not be believed or acknowledged is almost
Mm,
worse than the physical harm
yeah.
caused by the surgery. It just adds massively to the
Yeah.
trauma, I think.
Yeah.
it certainly left deep psychological scars for me. But
So when Nanny,
yeah,
sorry,
yeah.
please carry on.
No, that's fine. Yeah.
So when Nanny was a year old, you started experiencing problems with your bowels, which eventually resulted in a colostomy and a stoma bag. So please, could you explain what a stoma bag is about? What's it for? How does it work?
Well, a stoma bag is worn when you've had part of your intestines removed, usually because of disease, so Crohn's disease, ulcerative colitis, diverticular disease. If the bowel is very diseased, they literally cut a bit out, and the
Right.
end bit is then brought out onto your skin, and a
Mm.
stoma is formed. A stoma just means opening. You then have
Oh,
to wear, yeah, you then have to wear a bag over the opening though to collect the waste. And I
mm,
know that that sounds awful, but I think if you've been really ill with these awful bowel diseases, quite often it gives you your life back. And
yeah,
as I say, when I had my colostomy and then other operations, it did give me my life back. But obviously, lots of people can't accept having a stoma, and I can understand that as
yeah.
well. Yeah.
You were then diagnosed with Crohn's colitis, but there was uncertainty, and it was suggested that you had an ileostomy, and you underwent surgery in 1989. What was the result of that?
Well, during this surgery in 1989, I had the rest of my large bowel removed, meaning, as you say, I then had an ileostomy.
Mm,
For me, it freed me from disease, enabling me to carry on with life. Having
mm.
to wear a bag 24/7, was a price worth paying to experience good health again.
I think we'll
Yeah.
all do anything for to get rid of
Oh, yeah.
pain. I know.
Yeah. There's a popular saying on the stoma forums, better a bag than a box. As in many
Exactly.
cases, it
Yeah.
is life-saving. And for me, it was definitely life-changing. Yeah.
Then you became unwell again, and after having an MRI of your pelvis, it looked like you had a large mass, which could be ovarian cancer, but turned out to be severe endometriosis. Sorry, I nearly couldn't say it then. So what
Yeah.
happened? What happened then?
Oh, this was a particularly scary time. As my daughter was only 6, and I thought my ill health was behind me, to be honest.
Mm,
As you say, I'd had an MRI, and I remember we were on holiday, and I had a phone call from my mother saying the consultant secretary had called, and he wanted to speak to me. So I phoned him and basically said the MRI had picked up a suspect mass and I needed urgent surgery.
oh my goodness.
We cut our holiday short, and I had surgery shortly afterwards,
Mm,
which revealed not ovarian cancer, thankfully, but severe endometriosis,
mm,
which had essentially glued my insides together. There was nothing they could do for fear of damaging things further, so they just closed me up. But
wow.
that led to many more problems and procedures spanning the next 20 years, really.
I mean,
I
the
think I
byline
must have, yeah, I got the pelvis from hell without doubt.
of
Yeah, I still managed to work through it all, which
yeah,
was important to me, as it gave me a sense of purpose and,
yeah,
provided structure to my life.
sure.
Because my husband was in the Royal Navy, so yeah, they were tough times. I had a good family around me, though, thankfully.
The byline of your book title is After 40 Years of Surgery, My Luck Ran Out. So, at what point was that?
I've become complacent over the years, having had so much surgery, and I didn't appreciate really how lucky I'd been in a way not to experience serious complications, considering my long and difficult history of operations, etc.
Mm,
Ignorance really was bliss in some ways. But in 2015, after the hysterectomy, everything changed for me and flipped me over to the dark side, into the world of life-changing complications. I felt like my surgical luck had well and truly run out. And
mm,
for the first time in all my years of surgery, I realised how mutilating it was when it goes wrong. But I
yeah,
have to stress, what happened to me was exceptionally rare.
yeah,
And again, I don't want to frighten people, but rare doesn't mean never. And when these things do happen, when you are that tiny percentage of people for whom things do go wrong, it's a very scary and isolating place. And yeah, I think that was a massive turning point for me, because up to then I'd never had any complications whatsoever. So it was a massive shock.
Have you had an apology from anyone at all?
The simple answer to that, Claire, is no, but I hope you don't mind. I think it requires a bit of explanation. It's quite
Sure.
difficult to talk about this.
Well, it's up to you
I
if
mean,
you want.
when,
If you
but
want to talk about it,
no,
do.
I think it's important that I say, because there may be other people who are in a similar position. Really, when you experience these terrible outcomes to surgery, as I say, everything changes. At one point, I didn't even think I'd survive. I was totally traumatized by what had happened. And in the space of 48 hours, I'd gone from being reasonably well to being told I may never eat or drink again. I
Wow.
was 100 miles from home, and my mother not long had a massive brain hemorrhage and was really brain damaged. So the family were already in hell before
Mm.
this happened to me. And my situation was very much a watch and wait scenario with no guarantees. I was in hospital for months, just hoping it would heal. I never asked questions. I was never told about complaints, procedures, or anything like that, because as far as I was concerned, I'd just been unlucky and surgery goes wrong. We know that. My
Mm.
husband did ask, would there be an inquiry? And we were told yes, but we never heard anything after. And as I say, it took years really for me to have any sort of recovery from these surgeries. In fact, it's only in recent years that I've really started thinking about what happened in detail, and I found out things that I
Mm.
didn't know previously.
Wow.
And with that in mind, I found some courage somewhere left in my body, and I asked the hospital for support and answers, but they refused, saying I'm out of time. So I've been timed out essentially for things I didn't even know.
Oh.
And yeah, despite my awful outcome, I still don't have answers, and no one has ever apologised or even really acknowledged the seriousness of what's happened. I think the poor response from the hospital has most certainly added to my trauma. I
Yeah.
have to say the consultant has been very supportive, but I just think the whole sort of mechanism when somebody has really serious complications
Mm.
needs looking at, because I think it's made my experience so much worse.
I
Yeah,
bet. I bet it
yeah.
has. Inner strength is something that we all have, but we usually don't realize this until we're confronted with something that makes us draw on this strength. At what point did you realize you had this inner strength? Because obviously you have.
Well, it's only really in the last few years that I've had any feelings of inner strength, Claire. When this happened, I didn't cope very well at all. With no support from the hospital, when I came out, I had to pay for counselling, and I was diagnosed with PTSD, which
Mm.
made me an extremely anxious person, questioning everything,
Mm.
constantly looking over my shoulder. It caused problems in my relationship with my husband, as he just didn't get it. He
Mm.
didn't get my reaction. I hated the fistula. It controlled me, and I was afraid of it. I was essentially afraid of my own body.
Mm.
Yeah, in the past few years, I've had more therapy, and I do feel stronger now, strong enough to move on with life, whatever that may hold. It's only now I feel I have inner strength. Although I suppose it must have been there, or I'd never have survived this long.
Exactly.
Yeah,
Exactly. I
yeah.
can't begin to imagine what pain, desperation, and heartache you've been through. What advice would you give to anyone undergoing severe health problems?
Well, obviously, people go through far worse than what I've gone through, but we all have our own experiences of these things, and
Mm.
I think the only advice I can give is don't give up. Where there's life, there is hope, and I know that's a cliche, but this isn't a rehearsal. And I
Mm.
personally have wasted so much time worrying about things that just never happened. So now I try and build some happiness into my daily life
Good for
that
you.
brings me some contentment,
Mm.
and gives me joy.
Yeah.
I try always to believe that there will be brighter days, and I try to look after myself. I really lost myself during
Yeah.
this, worrying about everything and everyone. Don't do that. Don't do what I did. And you will get through it, one way or the other.
Deborah, where can Book Talk Radio Club's listeners purchase Sharp Scratch?
Well, Sharp Scratch has been published by Saron Publishers, but it is actually available to purchase on Amazon. And the different formats are on there. I think it's Amazon Global, so Amazon UK, America, Australia, wherever. Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you, Deborah. Best wishes for the future. And thank you so much for talking to us about your book and experiences. And thank you, everyone, for listening to Book Talk Radio Club. It was lovely to chat with you. Thank you.
Thank you, Claire.
All right. Bye now.
Bye.